Hello and welcome to Maximal Fire. I'm Alex.
And I'm Johnny.
And today we're building a battle group. So Johnny, it is the hottest day of the year so far today.
So far.
I feel like we have this conversation every time we record in the summer. It is sweaty in my little hot box of a room today. I think it's something like 30 degrees, which may not sound quite a lot to people in other countries, but for the UK, where we are equipped to deal with no type of weather, that's actually quite a big deal, and it's also sweaty as balls. So Johnny hasn't just come out of the shower, have you? This is just generally how you're looking today. I have come out of the shower.
I want to promise that I am not that disgusting, although a little bit earlier when we were setting up, I did come over and I was just soaked head to toe. But I promise it was the shower and not the fact that this room is an air fryer currently.
Yeah, well, that's a little kind of outhouse that you're in at the moment, isn't it? And it's basically like a roof, and it's a glorified shed, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, practically. We play D&D, and it's where we filmed the battle reports. So it's a lot more cramped than it looks. And when it's sat in the sun all day, oh boy, does it get
it's a great
spicy.
Space, but I remember recording some battle reports in the summer over there, and it does get a little bit sticky, even if it's not 30 degrees outside and really, really sweaty. But thank you for joining us today, guys. On today's episodes, we've got quite a lot that we want to cover today. We've had quite a few people kind of reach out to us and sort of request on a couple of occasions that we cover sort of like the basics of building a maniple. So we thought, how could we do this? We could do this in a series of short videos, or we could cover it as part of a podcast. And we'd always been kind of planning today to bring to you like a Legio Osedax deep dive, because we have plans involving Legio Osedax, which hopefully will come to fruition in the summer. But we thought, what better time than now to kind of talk through like our opinions on how we build a battle group in Adeptus Titanicus, and we will be focusing on the Titans rather than on like a knight household today, and then essentially kind of like put that into practice and talk through how I applied that kind of methodology to building a maniple for Legio Osedax, which will be the featured deep dive on today's episode. But there's also bits of news coming out. We just had the Sunday preview that's announced that the Devastation of Talon is coming out this Saturday. So by the time you see this, it's probably already on pre-order, but hopefully won't be out by now, which is obviously quite exciting. More content, as always, is always good fun. A couple of new models being released as well. But I think before we jump straight in today with the how to build a battle group, I just want to give like the usual shout outs first to our new patrons. So a few new patrons since the last time we recorded back in June. And so big thank you to Tom Doyle, Joseph Noblau, and Jack James. And we're also really excited as well to announce that we have a new sponsor on board with us since last time, and that is Rok Minis. So if you don't know who Rok Minis are, they are one of the UK's best sort of 3D printers when it comes to printing the Grimdark Terrain STLs and providing those in printed format to you guys. Grimdark Terrain being another one of our sponsors. It's kind of a bit of a match in heaven, really. You can get the STLs directly from Grimdark, or you can get the 3D printed products if you don't have the ability to do so yourself from Rok Minis. And they don't just do that, they do a ton of other stuff as well, anything related to 3D printing. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in the kind of sponsors section in the middle of the show. But do remember, just give us a like on Facebook. Give us a like on. Why not? Give us a like on Facebook. Follow us on Facebook. I mean, the amount of activity that we do on Facebook, and it's definitely not passive from Instagram or anything. No, give us a follow on Instagram, give us a like on Facebook, but most importantly, subscribe to us on YouTube. Give this video a like, leave some comments for us. All helps. The usual stuff that you hear podcasters say helps us break through the algorithm, blah 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 blah. But no, seriously, it does do us a big solid. The more people do that. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we did promise that when we hit 2,500 subscribers, we're going to do the next Legion tier list. This time for the loyalists. I think when we sat down and decided to do the traitors version, we didn't anticipate it being a 3.5 hour podcast, did we, Johnny?
That was a bit of a mistake. That got to a very long night, and then having to reshoot it again was it was a long one.
When you say reshoot it, we had to come back the week after because we also have the patron specific podcast, which is the New Sphere, which is a bit more casual, a bit more kind of answering patrons' questions, just talking generally about hobby. Additional podcasts that we do specifically on Patreon, but because it had been 3.5 hours of recording like the normal podcast, like we were like, I can't do another hour on top of this for the guys over on Patreon, so we had to kind of delay everything by about a week, and we came back and did that and released it all together. But if you do want more content from us, then you can get that through Patreon, and you can access that content from as little as £3 a month. So a couple of episodes now of the New Sphere in. We're going to be doing another one which will drop at the same time as this one as well. But I think what we might do when we hit 2,500 subscribers, instead of doing all of the the loyalist legions in one hit, we're going to split it, I think, into 2 videos, because especially if you're watching on YouTube, like a 3.5 hour video is a big commitment from anybody, whereas an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes, something like that per episode, I think is a bit more doable.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can do it all in one fell swoop as well. So it'll be good. I'm enjoying the our Patreon section. New Sphere is good fun. A little bit more relaxed than our normal content, should we say?
And we don't need to worry so much about being demonetized on YouTube, because it's obviously on Patreon. It's not on YouTube. You can't access it through that, so we can be just a little bit more casual when it comes to language and stuff.
We're not saying entirely crazy stuff that will get us demonetized, but it's definitely just nice having that just speaking in a little bit more relaxed environment.
Just a little bit of blow for the dads.
Sure.
Speaking as the only dad, but
a
little bit of blow for the dads.
I've got dogs.
You've got dogs. I'll do.
Yeah.
So let's get into it. How do you build a battle group in Adeptus Titanicus? It's something which I think with any game system, when you kind of get into it, and I'm certainly finding this myself, because we're starting to dabble a little bit in Age of Darkness as well, and especially when a game has been out for a while, and there is so many books available. There's a reasonable amount of models. There's lots of different weapon options. It can be quite kind of daunting as to how you kind of commit to a game, and also you're often a little bit worried about how you build your models, how that will affect your gameplay without really knowing how those models work.
I think that was a big one for me when I started Legions Imperialis, was working out actually, what we actually need to buy and how that translates into a game. So let alone something that's well established that has much more variety. It does kind of put a hold on the rest of your hobby, where you work out actually what do you want to build, because let's face it, they're not cheap models. So
for sure, and
you can't be,
Legions is a good example, right? Because like when everybody started playing the game, like it was like, why on earth would I put like bolters on my heavy bolters on my sponsors? I'll just take las cannons or autocannons, surely.
Yeah.
And then it was only as people kind of started to get to know the game a little bit better, it was like, oh, hold on a second, point defense is really strong in certain scenarios. So actually, I kind of see the reason why you would want heavy bolters on that particular build. So you're your understanding definitely develops as you get familiar with the game. But we are I mean, LI doesn't really matter too much because, I mean, if anybody is going to get dickish with WYSIWYG on 8mm tiny tanks, then you're probably playing with the wrong people. Most people don't care as long as they know what it's supposed to be and you're upfront and honest with them. But the main advantage for AT is magnets. Like, you can magnetize the shit out of your Titans. We did a guide about a year and a bit ago as to how you magnetize your Titans, and that I'll put a card at the top if you've not seen that, which basically allows you to just keep trial and error, essentially. Like, try this gun out today, great, okay, didn't like that, okay, I'll never use that again. But because there isn't much in the way of kind of new content for AT, like, the meta is kind of matured a little bit, and it isn't overly developing any further because there's no new models being imminently released. There's not been any weapon releases since Legions Imperialis came out. And so the meta is kind of matured, and so is the opinions and the thinking behind them. So, like, I mean, frankly speaking, some weapons are just downright better than others, and you don't really know that until you know it, so to speak. So where do you start when it comes to that? Well, first thing, like I said, magnetize. Or always go out and buy yourself at least some 3mm by 1mm magnets and some 5mm by 1mm magnets, and that will pretty much sort you for more or less anything that you would need. I think there's some 6x1s for the War Master as well, if memory serves me correctly. But ultimately, the weapons come down to more what the sort of purpose is for those particular weapons. But the first thing you need to consider when you're building a list is your points level.
Buy the rule book.
Buy the rule book.
Step 2. Buy the models.
Yeah. There is in fact, if you want a buying guide, we also did a video about that, didn't we? Like, if you want to get started with Adeptus Titanicus in 2024, watch that video. That's up there somewhere. I don't know where my finger will be on them.
It might even be above me. Who knows?
It might even be above Johnny. I think it'll be above me, if my memory serves how I edit these videos together.
Not anymore.
Not anymore.
Let's grab it, and I don't even know if that's the right side of the screen.
Well, it's somewhere. Anyway, watch that video if you are brand new. But let's be honest, right? If you don't know how to build a maniple, then you're probably not going to be going straight in at 2,000 points. You're probably going to be aiming for a lower points level. But the considerations and the differences that you need to make when you are building different points level, it changes. So how you approach a 1250 points list versus a 1750 points list versus a 2,000 points list versus a 3,000 points list, it does change slightly because priorities shift depending on the points level. To give you an example, right, 1250 is the kind of the upper limit for, what do they call that, skirmish? What is it? Skirmish, confrontation, epic clash, I believe, if memory serves me correctly. So 1250 is like your entry level, and generally speaking, for you to field a maniple in that, you're probably going to be looking at lighter maniples and lighter Titans. With your 1750, that's personally where I think is kind of a bit of a sweet spot for AT. You get a mix of everything, but it's not kind of all the toys. And then
you
at
can't
2000,
abuse strong stuff as well at kind of 1750
without a big compromise.
Without a big compromise, yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
And then at your sort of 2,000 points upwards, that's when you can basically have everything. So the points levels do make a big difference. We ran an event before Johnny joined the podcast, actually, when Ben was still here. We ran an event which was a 1650 point event at Entoyment, and it was really interesting to see how different 1650 was to 1750 with the maniple options which were selected between the two. And you would expect to see in a smaller points game a lot of the lighter engines, so kind of like your Warhounds, Reavers. Now you would see Direwolves as well, I think the 1750 points limit, you are kind of starting to see a few more warlords, whereas at the sort of 2000 points, you would expect to see a few warlords, warbringers, possibly even a Scythe Titan or a War Master. So really your points limits will determine how you want to play. And when it comes to building a maniple and building a battle group in Adeptus Titanicus, you need to consider your play style. Now, there's two ways that you can kind of approach building a maniple. You either want to be this, you can either go for what's called an activation advantage, or you can go for a firepower advantage. And what I mean by that is, generally speaking, activation advantage is you take cheaper, smaller units and out-activate to out-maneuver your opponent. Whereas if you are going for, a firepower advantage, you would be picking heavier Titans in the hope that you can claw back an activation disadvantage through killing your opponent's Titans quite quickly. So an example of this would be at 1750. You can get, with Legio Osedax as an example, you could probably get about, I think, 7, or possibly sometimes with the right loadouts, 8 Warhounds in the 1750 list, which means lots of activations. You'll have 7 or 8 activations, and on top of that, but it would be of those kind of lighter engines, which can be quite vulnerable but very quick.
What would you say the average kind of Titan count is in 1750? I would say around maybe 5
to 6. I
5
think
to 6, yeah,
would be my opinion, because you've got your on the flip side at 1750 would be kind of like your extergimus, because you can fit 3 warlords in a 1750 point list. So on one side you've got 8 warhounds, on the 7 or 8 warhounds, the maths escapes me. On the other side, 3 warlords. The warlords will be very, very vulnerable to being out activated, forced to do things, and your opponent can react to you if they've got an activation advantage. But it really does mean that you need to capitalize on dealing as much damage as possible with those Titans when they do activate, to make sure that you're really getting your money's worth for them. So you would usually kind of like back those up with stratagems or war gear, just to make them even more potent, or to enhance their potency, so to speak. But what is often done, especially when you're kind of looking at sort of the higher activation lists, is when you hit that. This is why I say that there's 5 to 6 is probably the average at 1750. Is at 1750 you often see dual maniples, and what I mean by that is 2 maniples where they've basically taken the minimum criteria, the mandatory components, and that will then open up options with things like a second Princeps ability, and that's often the reason why people would take a second maniple, or just to really specialize what one set of Titans is doing over another.
I think that's one of the like learning points when you start playing AT, right, is the realization of, I get so much out of running 2 maniples if the points support it.
Yeah,
because you've got room for, Princeps traits can be pretty spicy, if you've got room for 2, there's, you can take kind of the more like dominant strategist, something that's universally taken most games, a lot of games, and you could combine that with something that's a little bit more fringe, but works for your list. So yeah, and
it also allows you to take more of a maniple that you really like. So say, for instance, you really like a Venator maniple, or a Ferox maniple. You could likely fit in 2 demi maniples of Venators or Feroxes, allowing you to have an additional 6 Titans instead of the maximum 5, which that maniple would cap out at. But it really does kind of come down to sort of your own personal playing style. And I think that the starting point for anybody who is looking to get into AT is what kind of player are you? Because before you kind of decide on what Legio rules to use or what Titans to select, you should kind of go in there with an idea of like how how do I like playing? Am I somebody that is quite a defensive player? Or I like standing back and shooting from long range. So perhaps you're a guard player or something, or a Tau player in 40k, and you like a gun line. Or are you an aggressive player, either all out and out combat aggressive, or like a Tyrannid player, or are you a pressure player? Do you like kind of maybe not going all out to full on combat, but do you like applying pressure to your opponent by pushing up aggressively up the board and seizing objectives and then sitting on them and making your opponent come to you instead? And a lot of that will depend on will dictate to you what type of Titans to take. If you are a defensive gunline player, you will probably gravitate towards heavier Titans. You'll probably want to be playing with things like Warlords. You might want to also be playing with things like Warbringers, or some of the longer range weapon loadouts of Reavers. If you are somebody who likes combat, you would kind of assume, oh well, if you like combat, you want the fastest models, therefore you want Warhounds. But in actuality, you will probably want Reavers, because Reavers are by far and away the best combat platform in the game. So you will gravitate towards a mana pool with lots of Reavers. Or if you kind of just like seizing objectives, pressuring your opponent out, activating them, that kind of stuff, then you will probably gravitate towards those with more Warhounds in their detachments. So you can often tell a lot by how a particular maniple will play by its loadouts, and you shouldn't necessarily always be fooled by the rules which are in there, but rather the chassis that are in there. So a Fortis maniple, as an example, is a very defensive maniple. The maniple itself consists, if you completely trick it out with all of the Titans available to it in the 5 maniple slots, you get 2 Warhounds, 2 Warlords and 3 Reavers. Now, just because it in itself is a maniple which really kind of leans into standing still and soaking up firepower, you've got Reavers in that force, so there's absolutely no reason at all why you can't have one of your Titans kitted out as a close combat Reaver. If you like kind of a maneuver activation game, you now have things like Shudder and Swarmer missiles for Warhounds and conversion beamers. So whereas before that they were very much a short range option, now you can take a long range gun platform in the form of a Legio maniple, which combines both Warhounds and Warlords. So really, depending on how you like to play, I think the best thing for you to do is to kind of first off decide how you like to play a game. What type of playing style is going to give you the most enjoyment out of AT? And from there, choosing the Titans that you want to build it around. The starting point for anybody is going to be Reavers and Warhounds. If you have, 4 Warhounds and 4 Reavers, then you've basically, that's two boxes of two starter boxes, or 2 boxes of the Legions Imperialis starter set and 4 Reavers. Then you can make a lot of different maniples from the game straight out of the box. The only thing you might need is to add in a Warlord here and there, and it opens up even more to you. But determining how you want to play the game will dictate to you what maniple you should probably lean towards, and from there on in you can start talking about Legio rules and weapon loadouts.
I think it's important as well. If you're like me and lore is like a big part and that narrative stuff is a big part of what you do, also find the Legio that sings to you as well. Work out what, if you're looking at Volpa, for example, right? And then you're looking at their colors, or you're just liking the vibe of their Legio, then you've got a clear path of what you need to build, which isn't the long range Tau player experience, because none of your traits or anything like that line up to it. So I think there's a few things to definitely bear in mind as well. You might find that the ideal playstyle Legio that you come across might not have, like, the color schemes might not be your vibe, or the rules or the lore or whatever. So there are definitely things to bear in mind as well.
I think you touched on a really good point decision there as well. The main thing that's going to stop you from playing AT, or the main thing that's going to kind of put you off, is picking a Legio purely based on the rules, and then realizing you now have a color scheme that you hate painting, and then the Legion doesn't get finished painted, and you get fed up with it, you get frustrated with it, and it ends up going in a bin. So, or going on Fleabay. So, enjoying painting is probably, certainly if you're a hobbyist, primarily in the game a second, which seems to be a lot of the AT crowd. Like, there seems to be much less when it comes to every time. I haven't seen many games where there's not been fully painted stuff on the board. It doesn't often happen that people turn up with bare plastic.
It's a low model count game. Even if they are bigger models, being able to complete a model, and that being like 1/5, 1/6 of your army, is extremely satisfying as a hobbyist. Like,
that's one of the problems that I'm having with Age of Darkness, is going from a game where you need 5 models to a game where you need 50 random Joes.
Exactly the same issue as I'm having with getting Legions Imperialis ready. Concept wise, the game is very good for narrative play, but reinforcing my army with more units, just the thought of it is just like, oof.
Here's another 60 troops to paint. Yeah.
Here's another 60 microscopic troops to paint, and like, I'm not going to be happy with them until they look good at like a close-up view that no one's ever going to look at them at. So yeah, I feel that for sure. It's definitely something you just bear in mind, that your workflow is going to be. I mean, I'm finding the same thing with Age of Sigmar, the new set at the moment. I'm doing a little doubles tournament with a friend, and I've chosen to be the Stormcast to his Cities of Sigmar. And I have like 8 models to paint, and it's great. It's actually getting me like excited for the game, because I'm not stressing about painting, like an entire army's worth of people. That's why I played Underworlds for so long.
And not putting yourself under a lot of pressure is another great thing about AT, because because your models aren't painted in the heraldic color scheme of Gryphonicus, say for instance, does not stop you from using their rules. In fact, I think most people would, if you play somebody who's a veteran of AT and you turn up and say, these guys here, they're painted as Legio Vulpur, but actually today I'm going to run them as Presagius. Most people would be like, as long as the weapons are all right?
Yeah.
But, they'd be like, yeah, cool, no problem. They would probably rather you do that than turn up with your custom color scheme and say, and these are using the Crusade Legio rules, because the Crusade Legio rules are a little bit more balanced than they used to be, but they're still they can be quite obnoxious if abused. And for a lot of people, there's almost, I think, a little bit of PTSD still left over from the previous iteration of Crusade Legios, which, rightly or wrongly, kind of turns people off to them, even though now they've gone through quite some significant changes and they're not as bad as they used to be. They still are they can be quite good. So I think most general players would much rather kind of say, yeah, fine, I've got no problems with you. That looks like a great Legio. Thank you very much for painting it. Oh, today you're using Vulturum rules. Okay, cool. Let's do that then. They won't care. So painting up something that you enjoy is by far the next sort of thing to consider as to how you're going to stay engaged with the game. But the Legio rules that you select will have often quite a big impact on how you build your list, because certain legions are just better at doing something than other people. Now, it's not to say that you cannot run a Legio Vulpa list, for instance, as a gun line. Absolutely could do that, but you will be losing out on quite a lot of things which make Legio Vulpa very specific and give them a role. You'll be not getting much benefit out of their war gear. You're probably not going to be getting a whole lot of advantage out of their Legio traits. So although you can...
Yeah, we're gonna probably cover it later on, but in a game where all the units are very, very similar, and actually the kind of variety relies on these Legio rules and weapons, if you're not just like slightly putting yourself at a disadvantage because your traits aren't lining up to your playstyle, you're actually quite significantly putting yourself at a disadvantage, because the balance is quite finely tuned, because all the like I said, all models are essentially the same thing, really.
Yeah, for sure.
Everyone's using the same Titan classes.
The only thing at that point which becomes a differentiator is player skill. And a decent player can win games with no Legion rules. It's perfectly possible, and some legions generally don't have great rules in them, or certainly kind of defining rules in them, and can be kind of quite one way or another. There's no real kind of true way to run them, but certainly a lot of them will have something which that they favor, be that specific weapons that they favor. So to give an example of one of Johnny's Legios, he has Tritonus, and he has what they call static missiles,
radiative warheads,
yeah, which are an upgrade for Apocalypse missile launchers. If you have Legio Krytos, then they have their, I forget what they're called as well, but their weapons are also an upgrade to Apocalypse missile launchers. And if you are a Vulpa player, then they have abilities which improve the quality of melee weapons. So there will usually be something in their war gear, in their traits, which will kind of push you down a road to possibly favor one weapon or one chassis over another. Gryphonicus. Upgrades to basically one of their rules is it gives them access to more Reavers than anybody else. So you're probably going to take more Reavers with them than Warlords. They also you've also got things like Chasmata pattern lasers for Tempestus, which means that maybe you're going to favour a few more laser weapons. But there is a fine line between leaning heavily into a Legion's special rules and overspending on those Legion's special rules. And that is where a bit more of the nuance of actual list building comes in. Just because you can take, the what they're called, radiative warheads on your Apocalypse missile launchers, doesn't mean you should on everything. You should consider...
They are so expensive.
Exactly. And all of a sudden you can find yourself 50, 100 points down with certain war gear if you end up taking them on everything. That on top of the cost of the weapon as well. So where does your Legion strengths lie? Are there any particular Titans that they favor? Again, using the Tritonus example, they like Warlords. They have a ability to swap Reavers for Warlords. How many times have you done that, Johnny?
I'm gonna be doing it this time round.
But the point is that you don't always do it.
No.
There is some Legion rules where you definitely always would, but there's going to be some like that where you don't have to. There is some
and to back
benefits.
up that point as well, I'm not taking radiative warheads this time round.
No, just because you can doesn't necessarily mean you should. And it should all come down to how you want that particular force to play. And the best thing of all is just trial and error. But once you've kind of decided on what Legio you're going to play, you have kind of then started looking at a suitable maniple for it. Like I said, if you're looking at Gryphonicus, and they can swap in Reavers for Warlords or Warhounds, then you're probably looking at maniples with Reavers or Warhounds to swap in. and then you're looking at the underlying rules for that particular maniple. Once you've kind of got your maniple decided, then you need to start thinking about your weapon choice, and this is where it can be kind of quite overwhelming for most new players due to the amount of weapons which are available. But also, there's a cost a lot of the time involved in some of these. Like there's some which are included on the sprue, but then there's all the Forge World weapons as well. So broadly speaking, and I think I'm going to do an episode specifically on this to kind of redo an old podcast that we did back at the start. There's 3 different types of weapons that you can kind of choose from, and those are rippers, strippers, and finishers. So your rippers are your high volume, high dice count. Your strippers are your high dice count weapons designed to strip shields. You have to, more often than not, you're going to have to strip shields before you can start doing damage. So the quicker you can get your opponent's shields down, the better.
Either your Vulcan Mega Bolters, your Apocalypse missile launchers, anything like you said with just crazy high.
Your Volkite,
generally low strength, but that's not the point of them, right? You're not using them to hurt. You're using them to strip.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you have things like which we refer to as rippers, and your rippers are there to punch a hole, essentially, that you can capitalize in. These will be your relatively low dice count, high strength weapons. Quite often they will be blast weapons, but they don't necessarily need to be. Examples of rippers would be melter cannons, volcano cannons, and plasma blast guns in particular. And then your last ones are finishers. And there is a slight kind of overlap between strippers and finishers. The idea being that a finisher should be able to target a specific location if it needs to, which is why blast weapons aren't generally good as finishers, because they're completely random where they hit. So it needs to have enough dice to be able to throw that, targeting a location at a -2 or a -1 if you're close, as well as do enough damage on its own, but increased by any structural damage that you've caused by your previous damage that you've inflicted by the +1, +2, +3 that you get on the damage track. So there's often a little bit of overlap here, but some of the best finishes are things like Gatlings, and the reason that Gatlings are particularly good is they're strength 5, 6 dice, but they also have ordnance, which means when you are doing that kind of finishing shot, so to speak, you're re-rolling ones if you roll that on the armor roll. So that ordnance ability is really handy for finishing. But then if you've got a couple of +2s or a +3, or if you're in a flank or in a side, then things like Vulcan Megabolters, Apocalypse missile launches, those really low strength but high dice weapons are really, really good at finishing as well. Then you have things like the Sun Fury Plasma Annihilator, which sits basically in the middle of everything. It has 4 dice, it has a good strength, it can be basically used as anything. In a pinch, 4 dice, you don't fire at maximal fire, that's potentially 4 dice of shield damage that you will get, that will hopefully get your opponent's shields down. You can push it with a maximal fire up to 10, so it can do a decent amount of damage and act as a bit of a ripper. And again, 4 dice, you can target with it, and you can target locations, so it's also a really good finisher as well. So it kind of crosses the boundaries between all 3. And the reason I'm explaining this sort of now to those of you who don't kind of aren't familiar with the terms is that your force really needs a balance of all of them. Like, even if you are a close combat heavy monster, there is going to be occasions where you're just not going to be able to get in combat. So if you are packing purely, maybe like I think, to use the example of the bat rep that we did, Lania Scara versus Vulpa, the infamous bat rep, where you went all combat and you had some warp missiles. You fired the warp missile when they couldn't attack, and then after that, if they couldn't get in close combat, they couldn't do anything. and you can kind of keep your opponent at bay. But if they've got an Apocalypse missile launcher on the back, then that thing has a 360-degree arc of fire. It can indirect fire anywhere on the board without line of sight. So if you're stuck at the back because you've been quaked or something similar, then you've got an option. You'll always have something to shoot with it. And it can also act as a finisher against targets of its same size or bigger. So although you're less likely to want a full amount of kind of balance on something like Vulper as an example, right? Because Vulper is all or nothing for a lot of the case. But for most Legios, you will want a balance. You will want to have enough strippers in your force without having too many that you've got no way of actually doing damage to your opponent. You'll need to have a mix of rippers in there as well, and a few finisher weapons. So because how the kind of meta has evolved, this is why you will generally find on Warhounds there is something called the Tournament Pattern Warhound. It's called Tournament Pattern because it's one of the main things you will see at a tournament is the Vulcan Megabolter and Plasma Blast Gun Warhound. Both of those weapons are arguably the two best weapons in the game. You've got things like lasers, of course, or Ursus Claws, and you might have a reason for taking those, but for the most part, you will often find that you'll be wishing that you took like the Vulcan Megabolter and the Plasma Blast Gun.
I took lasers once in the Tritonus bat rep because at the time Warhounds didn't have access to missile weapons at all, and I was running Regia, which meant that to get the full benefit of the maniple, the Warhounds had to stick close with the Warlords, and Warhounds being close range, fast moving, beasts, meant that their weapon options weren't that great for long range. So the longest range was the turbo laser, but the entire time I was just wishing I had a better weapon, like literally anything else.
But there's more options now, right? We've got the Swarmer missiles, which are really good. So there is a few more options at long range. But again, that would come under the kind of category of a stripper. For your Reavers, really your main kind of consideration with them would be a tried and tested combination is the melter cannon, the Gatling, and a Vulcan Megabolter or an Apocalypse missile launcher on top. The one of the trade-offs you can do comes down to how many points you need to save. You can swap out the melter cannon for something like a volcano cannon. You're saving, I think it's 15 points, but for that you're losing a point of strength and you're having to push to shoot the weapon. But you gain a longer ranged, sort of slightly weaker version of the melter cannon. And Warlords, you have things like the Bellicosa at 55 points, the Volcano Cannon, which is one of the best all-round sort of weapon, best rippers in the game at strength 12. It's one of the few things that can auto-kill Acastus Knights. It will give any Knights generally just a bad day, but it will also cause... You're pretty much more than likely going to cause an automatic critical hit on a Warhound if you hit with one of those things when their armor's down. And then on your other side, it's something like a Plasma Blast Gun. But again, your loadout on a Warlord will largely depend on if you're planning on playing them aggressively or defensively. And you should always look to kind of try and synergize your weapons across all of the Titan chassis that you take. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to be taking a... give you an example. On a Warlord, I personally would not take a Quake in one hand and a Gatling cannon in the other. And the reason why I wouldn't take that as a loadout is because the weapons themselves they don't synergize. You have a Mori Quake cannon, which is really long range, but is suffering a -1 to hit on anything underneath 24 inches. And then you have the Gatling, which has a maximum range of 24 inches. So to be able to use your Gatling, you are going to be pushing yourself up to a distance where your other primary weapon is at a disadvantage and is probably going to scatter a lot, and is less likely to hit because you're going to be rolling 4+ in most legios. So coming up with a pairing where all of your weapons kind of sit at around the sort of same price tag is definitely beneficial. That's why you will often see on a Reaver the Gatling, Melter, Vulcan Megabolter, or the Apocalypse Missile launchers, because the two primary arm armaments come in at 24 inches. Your Vulcan Megabolter is only 20. Your Apocalypse Missile launcher is much longer, I think 120. It's, I always forget. It's a long range. You get bonuses over 30 inches. So with that, it's kind of good at any range because there's no negative for short range. But everything else is wanting you to kind of play a certain way, is to push up, is to get close, get in within 24 inches. If you want a longer ranged version of that, then, if you wanted to play defensively, then maybe you would take a volcano cannon in one hand, which is much longer ranged, and you would pair that possibly with something like a laser blaster, which, although isn't as long ranged as the volcano cannon, you're still getting, is it 32 inches, 36 inches? I can never remember again. Never really fire these things at long range, but it's longer range than the Gatling. So, and that will cover most of a 4 foot by 4 foot table. So those weapons are going to synergize better. And again, the laser blaster is a negative to hit. Oh no, it's negative to hit over 16 inches, isn't it? So it's struggling to hit at long range, but it can shoot at a longer range. So you are sacrificing a little bit there, but when you get within 16 inches, both of those weapons can still fire normally because there's no negative for a volcano cannon to hit at a shorter range either. So it's really about making sure that if you can fire your weapons, it's beneficial to be able to fire all of your weapons, because every time you can't fire your weapon, you are going to be essentially wasting points. And trying to be as efficient with points as possible is the way, in my opinion, to win games. So there is no point in standing your 24-inch maximum range Reaver at the back of the table if your opponent is going to sit at the back of the table as well. You need to push him up, because every time you're not shooting, you are not capitalizing. He has an advantage over you. So your game style needs to kind of go along with what am I trying to say? You need to play to the models that you've picked. Your game style needs to adapt with the play style that you've picked.
Yeah, you can never, when you're list building, I guess the hardest thing is just not knowing what you're going to be thrown up against, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's, obviously you can follow your local meta to a certain degree, right? Roughly what people tend to take in your area or in your in your country even, but really it's varied enough that you could be up against a knight list or or a full warlord extremagus or something like that. So you need to make sure that you have the variety to deal with. I guess it's kind of more important for I guess more tournament play, but you need to make sure you have the variety to deal with all comers, because stuff like my stupid Vulpa or melee list is just, unless you're going up against people that haven't experienced melee lists or melee heavy lists before, or just like inexperienced players, you're going to get wrecked basically, because people can outplay your kind of skew lists quite easily once they know actually what the weaknesses are.
And this is why often you will see quite similar things tournament play from non-competitive play is very different, because you will generally, if you're not playing competitively and you're playing with some mates, you're more likely to just try stuff out. But if you're turning up to a tournament and you are interested to kind of do well at that tournament, then your list really needs to be able to, see all comers. And And if you don't have something that can deal with knights, then you can guarantee that you're going to get drawn against a list with lots of knights in it, and you're going to come out kind of in a lot of pain as a result. Which is why things like the plasma blast gun is popular, which is why often people will take a Vox Blackout in their stratagem hand, even if they don't intend to use it. Like, it's one of those things you don't want to be without it.
Yeah, and especially now that the stratagem hand is a thing, right? Like, now that people actually have that flexibility to take specific stratagems to screw over skew lists.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and that kind of leads quite nicely into it as well, because once you have kind of built your list, and once you have kind of chosen the Titans, you've chosen your Legio, you've chosen the Titans that you want in there, and as a result, you have chosen your playstyle and you've chosen your maniple. You've leaned into the weapons that you want to take to suit that playstyle, to benefit that maniple a bit more. You then also need to start thinking about the stratagems which go with it. I think stratagems are kind of like the most personal choice out of this, because I think that, you know, every time I go to an event or run an event, you will always see some of the same old stratagems, and we've done some like metrics and counting of this sort of stuff on some of our events in the past, and we've done articles on them as to where the meta's at. But you know, it's never identical. There's, you know, somebody has always got a stratagem that they just love, so as a result, it's always in there. It's always one to use. So I won't really tell you people how to, you know, what to take, but there are some which will always just generally be useful to take. Vox Blackout is the main one. It's expensive. It can be a little bit feel baddy, but now
incredibly feel baddy.
Incredibly feel baddy. But as you kind of alluded to right now, our stratagem hands are open. People know what cards you have taken as part of your stratagem hands. They know you've got that in your hand. It's not like you go, aha, here it is, and fuck you. You know that that's in there, so you need to expect that that is probably going to get played if you are playing a certain way. So that is usually one that's always in there. Concealment Barrage is always one which consistently does well, which is always useful. And after that, it really comes down to kind of personal tastes and what you want to do with your Legio, and choosing your stratagems to improve aspects of your Legio is wise. So if you are a combat Legio, if you are a non-corrupted traitor combat Legio, then immediately two stratagems which come to mind are Warlust and Is it Bloodthirsty or Bloodthirst?
Bloodthirst, yeah.
And because both of those basically boost your ability to get into close combat. One allows you to pass full stride orders much easier, and it also gives you 2 additional inches to your boosted movement speed. And the other one allows you to pass charge orders much better. I believe also gives you an extra dice in combat as well.
I think it's extra dice while charging. I don't know whether it's normal combat.
It'll be bad if this example I'm using is completely nonsense, but it's been a while because since since Corruptions came out, you see Bloodthirst less likely. But yeah, you add 2 to any. The player's Titans add 2 to any to hit rolls made against enemies within 2 inches of them. In addition, they add 2 to the command checks when attempting to issue the charge order. So it's a bonus to hit as well as a bonus to getting the charge order off. So if you combine those 2 together, you're going to get an extra 2 inches of movement by boosting your speed. So a Reaver all of a sudden is going 11 inches, which gives it, what's that? That's 3 dice. Not quite enough to kind of get any additional dice out of it, but you're passing, even though Warlust is for issuing full stride orders, the benefit of the boosted speed applies to all Titans across the table. and gives you those extra 2 inches. If you're charging Titan, then also doubles up and uses the Traitor Legion ability Unbridled Hatred, that gives them another 2 inches, and then all of a sudden that Titan is moving 13 inches, which does give it 4 additional dice on the charge on top of its melee weapon attack, and the Unbridled Hatred also adds additional dice as well. So you can stack these stratagems.
It's what's letting the Direwolves Tokyo drift up the boards at the moment. The melee Vulpa Direwolves that have been cropping their ugly little heads up everywhere.
It's a tad silly, but that's just an example, right, of how you can really lean in to one specific element of your playstyle. So that would be all about getting those into close combat. If you are planning on pushing forward, securing an objective, and then dragging that objective back, if it's one of those kind of type missions, taking things for loyalists like what's it called? Long Retreat. Is that the name of it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the name of one, whether it's the one you're thinking of. This is how you know this isn't scripted.
Yeah,
it's all coming from the heart, guys.
Yeah, no. So basically, Long Retreat, you can move your full speed outside of your arc. So a warlord being able to boost 6 inches backwards, whereas normally they'd only go a maximum of 3, is a big deal. And you can keep facing forwards, or you could, like you say, drift 6 inches to the side, whereas normally you would do 3. And the amount of times that's caught people out by all of a sudden I'm in your flank and I'm getting bonuses to that, or all of a sudden I'm outside of the range that you were expecting me to be in. It kind of all leans into your play style. There's loads of wacky stuff as well that you can do, especially on the traitor side. They've got some really wacky abilities.
Warp displacement is one that I think throughout the longest kind of period of history in AT, people have had a love-hate relationship with.
Yeah.
There's like a big group of people that are like, oh, it's like crap, it's too unreliable. And there's another group of people that think it's really strong, very overpowered. And I'm pretty sure those groups of people change depending on whether it works in games for or against them. Because something like that where you're moving a random distance, but potentially quite a long distance as a additional move can be just.
But I think this is where you see the difference, though, isn't it, between loyalists and traitors? Because the loyalist stratagems are generally consistently good. Well point costed, pretty reliable. They do what they say on the tin. The traitor stratagems tend to be swingy as all hell. Like, depending on a role or something, they go from that can be utterly game-breaking to, well, how disappointing was that? And the warp displacement is an example of that, right? That gives you the ability that there will be one game where you roll a 6 on that, and you can move that bad boy 12 inches up and then charge.
Yeah,
literally teleport across. In fact, I think that's what's happened. What happened with that Vulpa, the Diabomb Vulpa, in one of ours. Massive warp displacement followed by like a 16-inch charge or something with a direwolf.
And they're forward deploying already.
Yeah, but for every time that you get that 12, you'll roll a 2. And it'd be like,
there is
great.
Nothing worse than rolling a 2 on a warp displacement as well, because, you're probably jumping into terrain as well, which is like extra bad because you're like hurting yourself. So swingy, but that's narrative, right? Narratively makes sense. You've got kind of like a level-headed, like loyalist approach to it, and then you've got the traitors that are just all kinds of wacky and relying on the favors of the dark gods, which their love for them waxes and wanes seemingly at random, and that's in a dice game more randomness can be fun.
But there's, especially on the traitors side, I think that when you're building a list, there is a real kind of there is a real temptation to accidentally overspend on corruptions, on war gear, all that kind of stuff.
It's too damn easy.
When I approach building a list, the first thing I do is think what actual chassis do I want in this, or how many activations am I aiming for here? Do I want to fit in a full Fortis maniple as the example? So the first thing I do is I plug in all of the titans that I want, get those titan costs in there, and based on those titan costs, it will give you an idea as to whether or not that's a realistic amount of points, a realistic idea for the points that you're playing at. So if you whack in, let's just open up Battlescribe now, just as an example. So if I go into my thing here, and I'm going to go, I want a new maniple, I want a new Fortis maniple, and I want it to be a full maniple. Therefore, it's going to have 3 Reavers and 2 Warhounds. Well, that's 1,520 points.
Before now weapons.
Now I probably can get that in a 1,750. However, the likelihood of it is probably not, or your weapon loadouts are going to be trash. So at that point there, you should be kind of considering, well, is that maniple going to be something that I can fit in at this point, or should I be looking at taking a minimum Fortis with a minimum of a lighter maniple, like a Ferox or something like that? But your Warlord Titans in particular, their weapons average anywhere from about 30 up to 60 points each. So when you consider that you have got 2 arm weapons and some carapace, the cheapest loadout that I can think of is a Apocalypse Missile Launcher and 2 Mori Quake Cannons, which are 20 points each. So it's 440 points for one Warlord with the most basic list weapons ever, and that also doesn't include things like tracking gyroscopes. So you have your fixed forward Apocalypse Missile Launchers in the corridor arc rather than the full arc. But weapons for me very much are the things which are the first things to change. You decide on your Titans, and when you have decided what Titans you want to run, you then try and make the weapons fit. So you start with, what was my preference here? So I want to be able to run a close range brawler and a long range Warlord Titan. I want to run 3 mid range Reaver Titans. Okay, so I'm going to do a Warlord Titan with Gatlings up top, Gatlings on one of the arms, and a Plasma for my close range one. All of that within 24 inches, all of that synergizing quite nicely. For my Warlord Titan, I want a long-range option, so maybe I'll take a Mori Quake, I'll take a Bellicosa, and I'll have some Apocalypse Missile launchers up top. And then for my 3 Reaver Titans, let's go with 3 sort of mid-range brawlers, Melter Cannon, Gatling Cannon, and Apocalypse Missile launchers, or Vulcan Megabolters, doesn't matter, they're the same points, do a similar job, just different ranges. So you plug all of that into Battlescribe and see where the points are. Like, do you now have points left over? Are you underneath the list, the points that you want to spend? If so, brilliant. Are you over? And if you're over, then you need to look back at what you've taken and kind of think, where am I willing to kind of make a few little compromises here? Like, do I really want what's on the Warlord? Or should I kind of look at seeing if I can make my Reavers a little bit cheaper? And how much are you over by? There's some weapons which are quite easy trade-offs between one for another. So if you want to save 15 points, as an example, you change a Melter Cannon to a Volcano. It's not quite as potent, but like I say, longer range, but it does have the drain.
Slap it on the Reaver with the missiles, and then you've got a double long-ranged.
Precisely that. There's ultimately some compromises that I would never want to make. And if I'm ever getting to the point where I feel I'm compromising too much on a list, that's where I would kind of be thinking, okay, well, it's time to change maniple. It's time to try and find something else which will fit, and kind of start again, because you've probably looked at your Legio rules and you've decided that there's some war gear in there that you want to do. But again, war gear, corruptions, like, there's definitely two schools of thoughts here, but it in my mind, you should be corrupting a Titan to do a specific job. You should be applying war gear to a Titan to do a specific job. It shouldn't just be a blanket application to every Titan on your maniple. Now there is some exceptions to this, right? I would always take on Audax. I would always take reinforced plating on my Warhounds if I've got the points to do it. On a Furian's maniple, I would always be taking hunting Auspex if I have the points to do it, because they're particular war gear pieces which are particularly potent and very good, and they're never a bad addition. They're well worth the points that they are.
And once you're, when you get, I guess, a bit more, or if you are a bit more experienced with the game, you know that there is definitely a kind of a cost benefit analysis to a lot of these items, and like you've just said, those are some of the best for what you're paying and what you're getting out of it as well, and that's why they're no brainers. But to hark on what you've said before, a lot of the time it should be specific for a purpose. Why are you corrupting that warlord? Oh, okay, well I just want to take Frozen Soul because I want to do a dual volcano, long ranged bully loadout. Like, sick, yeah, go for it, right? But if you're giving it, overwhelming rage, because it might get into a fight and the rest of your list are like melee, then it's like, no, that's just, you're just wasting money, wasting points at that point.
Yeah, you should try and avoid a jack of all trades, and try and have specific roles for each Titan on your list. What is it there to do? And if you're not doing what it's supposed to do on purpose, not because you've been forced to by your opponent, then you need to think about changing what you're doing. Because if you have an all melee Reaver, and that all melee Reaver is just going to be sat on your back line and nobody's coming towards it, then you've just wasted over 300 and something points on a Titan which is being ignored for most of the game. Sometimes it's good to take a melee Reaver in a backline list because they can act as a really nice kind of deterrent for people getting a little bit too close. But there should always be something that it can do. The way that I've kind of done, and I did this with my Tempestus list at the Greetings from the Warp event. I took one and it had a Apocalypse missile launcher, Gatling cannon, and a chain fist, which meant that it was decent as all hell in close combat. However, if it couldn't get into close combat, or I didn't want to advance it up the field because I was facing, I don't know, let's say knights, I didn't want to get it to be instantly jibbed by a load of knights, it could still use its other weapons. It could use its other weapons at range. It could still contribute. If he had been sat there with two melee weapons, then there was potentially going to be games where you just wouldn't get any benefit out of him other than as a sacrificial distraction Carnifex, which sometimes there is a benefit of doing that if you are going to play for that and you're going to get a desired result out of that. I've done that before. I did that when I played a game against Johnny Core of the Battle Bling store. I wanted him desperately to focus on one thing so he didn't see the other thing I was doing. And so what I did was I had a distraction Carnifex, which basically just ran straight forward, was a threat to everything in front of him. And then at the same time, full strided another Reaver up the table, which was basically trying to secure an objective, which was on his other half. And unfortunately, he fell for it. He threw everything at that one Titan. Yes, the Titan died, but it sucked up about 5 or 6 activations in one turn for it to die. And in the meantime, I'd secured the objective and I'd scored 25 points. So that trade-off is always kind of, you need to kind of be thinking, is me losing that going to be ultimately beneficial to my game plan? I hope this hasn't sounded too waffly.
I know. It's quite fun to talk about once once you kind of get into it and into the nitty-gritty of it. But yeah, you don't want it to, I guess, be too off-putting for anyone that is looking to step into the game or someone that wants to kind of go to tournaments or competitive events.
I think the problem with it.
Sorry, go on.
So I think the problem with it is it's so subjective because people develop their own favorites.
Mm-hmm.
People develop their own kind of like aversions or biases when it comes to this sort of stuff. So there's going to be lots of people who look at the lists that I put forward and think that's trash. You might think that, but I consider myself to be a pretty good AT player. I've lost far less games than I've lost far less games than games that I have won. And I think I personally feel like I've learned how to play AT from some of the best AT players in the UK. I'm not trying to big myself up or anything, but like that's worked for me. Now, I've seen people win with lists, and it wouldn't even occur to me to play like that. It wouldn't occur to me at all because I that's just not for me. Like you've got to strike that balance between what you get a kick out of and what works for you. Like I probably could run a load of corruptions and have like a hideous, I don't know, direbomb setup of all corruptions and lots of war gear and all that kind of stuff because I love corruptions and it's cool and they do funky things and I've got those sort of sort of look at my amazing thing. But I just don't get a kick out of that, which means I don't enjoy playing like that. And often it comes down to how you enjoy playing. Now, one person and the other person, on the other hand, that's their jam. That's what they love doing. I mean, you and I, like we're completely different.
Yeah.
You are all about the corruptions. You love playing like that. Like you're very aware of the power behind them, but you're also very aware of the limitations. So you can't get too angry when that shit doesn't come off.
No.
Because it's part of the kind of risk reward of leaning heavily into one particular play style. Whereas I, on the other hand, I try and play a bit more kind of not conservative because I'm quite an aggressive player, but I dabble with everything. Just don't often go all in.
You play safer.
A little bit safer, yeah.
Not in the sense of like you're not playing aggressively, but more in the fact that like you don't want to leave those kind of random chances. You're trying to restrict the effective chance of the randomness,
game, right? Yeah. And sometimes when it comes to event play, like having a force which is consistent and consistently good will probably be of more benefit than something which, when it works all the time, but then 60% of the time it works every time.
That's a fair,
and when it works, it goes off big. But then there's going to be those few which don't. I do try and kind of build lists which are all comers while still being quite competitive. I also play the game from a numbers point of view. So I'm always kind of thinking about average dice rolls. I'm thinking about how many shields on average am I likely to strip with that one weapon attack. Is there a reasonable chance that I'm going to need 2 activations to start hitting armor on this? Opponent's luck aside. I try and play a little bit of the maths game behind it. I'm pretty good at just judging distance, as most war gamers are. But knowing that, okay, that's probably about 11 inches. That means that my Reaver should be within close combat range to do some damage to that. I will risk that charge. And sometimes kind of, again, when it comes to competitive gaming, sometimes just doing things that people aren't expecting or making them think that you're doing something that you're not is kind of half of the brinkmanship which kind of comes with it. Can you persuade somebody that you're doing something intentionally when actually, or unintentionally when actually you are fully aware of what you're doing and you're trying to do it to distract from something else that's going on?
I think there's also a point about understanding your own limitations as well as a war gamer. Personally, I I don't have a lot of mental RAM when I'm playing war games. So if there is like a relatively straightforward path or the opportunity to like duplicate loadouts. Like I'm all for that, because then it's just there's less stuff to actually, what's the rule for this gun? Oh, and then I'm onto another Titan that has this gun and this gun and this gun, and I play too many damn war games as it is, right? So there's not a lot of room for all the minutiae of some of the rulings, even for AT. So just take what you've learned, hopefully from other war games, if you have played other war games, and apply that, because at the end of the day, that's all it is. It's just very different in the kind of the same way, but you still kind of have that those core fundamentals, which are your rolling dice and your moving models. It's just that you've got to understand that actually movement is pretty damn important. And I know movement is important in a lot of competitive games like 40k, Age of Sigmar, stuff like that, but specifically so when in AT it's both movement and facing. So you're not just moving to position a unit for a charge or to capture an objective, but you're moving to hit the side of a Titan or hit the rear of a Titan, right?
It's absolutely kind of like a game about tactical maneuvering as much as it is about shooting, and that's one of the things that I love about it.
It's battleships, really. It's a really advanced battleship game, right? You're moving something in the hope that the thing that you're lining up is still going to be there when you come to shoot at it, which is why, going back to kind of the beginning of our conversation, things like activation advantage is very important as well. Having those extra activations to throw away units that you don't need to have a perfect lineup on, or that can be your sacrificial pawns, so to speak, is really, really beneficial. So
and again, like you move that to try and get a reaction from your opponent.
Mm-hmm.
You push that unit up. Are they going to take the bait? Are they going to face it? Okay, well now this guy's going to come around here, and then that's the guy that I really wanted to get into that good firing spot, and now he's in your ass. That is where the real nuance of the game kind of comes in. But I think that the best thing that you can do when you're trying to kind of learn how to build a list is just get on Battlescribe, fire up a couple of lists, and just play around with certain different points. My personal favorite is 1750. That's where I generally learnt the game. It's still the place where I feel is the sweet spot for the game. I know some people disagree, but I don't like games where it's like you can take all the toys. I like to be able for there to be a little bit of compromise. And I think if you're not used to playing with a little bit of compromise, it kind of doesn't set you up well for kind of when you do all of a sudden get thrown into an event like that and it's, oh shit, I've only ever played 2,000 points. How do I build a 1750 list? How do I pay?
And it's so damn frustrating as well. Like list building when you are under a restriction, it is very frustrating. And especially I can imagine for people that might be newer to just wargaming in general, not necessarily Titanicus. A lot of the modern GW games now, war gear isn't something you pay for anymore. So I think having that kind of give and take of not being able to bring all of the fun stuff is quite a hard hurdle to get over. It is very, very easy to, as we just discussed previously, just load up on all the cool shit and then wonder why someone's bringing 2 extra Titans over you in the game you're playing against them, right? It's definitely something that I've noticed a lot more with this game compared to other games, is like just being annoyed that I can't bring certain things.
It's a tactical game, right? It's not just about the tactics of shooting, of taking objectives, of maneuvering. Building a list is a tactic in itself, and it can be quite tactical, which I think probably makes it quite so daunting.
Yeah, and we're not talking about like a flamer in a Space Marine squad. We're talking about like one of the 2, possibly 3 guns that your Titan is, is quite like considerably far greater impact because of the low model count on your war gear choices. So when you lock in those, it's not like, we'll give that squad a grenade launcher and a mining laser or whatever, right? It is okay, I need to make sure that if I'm going to put this melter cannon on this Titan, that it's going to get shot this game, or it's going to be effective. Because if not, I am seriously lowering my chances of winning.
And it makes it incredibly frustrating when you've spent 60 points on a conversion beam or extirpator, and then that thing does nothing the whole game because you keep spooning your rolls. Like, and it's going to happen. It's going to happen from time to time. I mean, luckily, most people just laugh about it and take it on the chin because it's that kind of game. But, build some lists in Battlescribe, and then I think one of the best places to to test these things is jump on our Discord and chuck up your lists in our list building channel, and there's always people in there ready to kind of give opinions or not necessarily right opinions. It's their opinion. Everybody's entitled to it, but it's sometimes interesting to kind of see what other people think of things. If generally people are saying the same things, they might have a point. But take your list, stick it in there, gather some opinions, then take it to the table. It's definitely, I think it's something which people worry about a little bit too much. Like, I'm going to sneeze now.
He says after we've dedicated an entire episode.
Yeah. Don't worry about it. Just give it a
go.
Don't
worry about it. But this entire rambling, which isn't even the tip of the iceberg.
This last hour and 15 minutes.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah, no, I mean, it is, at the end of the day, what's the worst that could happen? You play a game of AT and it goes hilariously wrong.
Yeah.
And you lose. So really the best thing is just to get out there and get playing the game. But don't make sure that you magnetize. I think that the biggest restriction you can put on yourselves is gluing your weapons, because then they are fixed. That is what they are. That's what they'll always be. And with a model count so low, you don't want to be, okay, this is my Gryphonicus. I now need 20 different variants of Warhound because I've glued all of the weapons, and this particular one, I need this particular type. No, just magnetize the whole thing, and it will massively take the pressure off of your list building and will allow you to keep experimenting. Okay, Johnny, I think we've probably talked a little bit too much about that. We were hoping this episode would come a little bit earlier. I think what we'll do is we'll do some news next from our sponsors and also from ourselves. And then we are going to do the Legio Osedax deep dive into their rules, and we'll look at maniple that we've created, applying some of this logic that we've been talking about so far in this first half. So without further ado, let us go over to our very exciting sponsors section. Okay, I think before we go onto the sponsors section, Johnny, are you still sweating? You're still here.
It's warm in this room still. Yeah.
Got a fan nicely blowing all this way. I'm going to hijack the sponsors section just a little bit to do our own little bit of a promo at this particular point in time. So we have the Corsair Gambit Part 2, which is happening on the 17th of August. It's the second part of our narrative campaign, written by our very own Mr. Johnny Eves.
Maximal Fire resident game master.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah,
dungeon master.
The first event was really good. Did that in April, so we followed it up with the second part of this. Now it's going to be 3 games, 1 day at End Tournament in Poole. If you are interested in playing some Legions Imperialis, there are still tickets available for that. However, obviously, by the time this goes out, probably will only be a couple of weeks left. So get your tickets sort of as early as possible to make sure that you're not disappointed, and also to give us enough time to actually kind of make sure that we have enough boards ready. But as well as that, we have dice now. I've bit the bullet and in partnership with a company called Counterattack Bases, basically created our very own Maximal Fire dice range. So, I say range; it's a range of one. You can have it. You can have it in one style.
You can have it duplicated 12 times.
Yes, duplicated 12 times. They are. I'm very pleased with them. I think they look really, really good. I do miss the Reaver like we had on the old one, but again, as we talked about last time, we can't really do that anymore, especially when we're marketing out to everybody. So if you are interested in getting your hands on a set of 12 Maximal Fire dice, There is a link in the description to a Google sheet. I don't have a storefront, so I'm kind of having to do this all manually. Register your interest on that, and I will get in touch with you if there are dice available, and we will sort out the logistics from there on in. But they are very sexy, very good. We're currently selling them for £15 plus postage for 12. So while we still have them, you can get your hands on them. Although I think I will probably, because of how quick counterattack bases were with getting us the dice, from ordering to receiving less than a week, which was amazing.
Wow. Yeah.
It's very likely that if there is demand, we'll just order some more, and it'll just be a little bit of a delay to get them out. But yeah, really, really happy with that. So that's our own little piece of Maximal Fire branded sponsorship updates.
We can sponsor ourselves, right?
Yeah, we can. I mean, if we can't sell our own shit on our own podcast, then what the hell are we doing for everybody else?
Yeah.
But let's now roll over to our friends at Bling.
In a world where war games reign supreme, one name stands above the rest. Bling, your ultimate destination for high-quality, 3D printed accessories. Whether you're seeking an upgrade kit or the finest weapon arms, Bling has it all. With hundreds of products in store, we've got something for every wargame enthusiast. Bling, choose your weapon. Okay, so Bling, obviously, every week they're releasing new stuff. I think there was a little bit of a lull last week purely because Johnny got the COVID, so there wasn't like a big announcement release. But they do have quite a lot of new stuff still adding. Their range is now pretty immense. Most exciting thing, Bling mugs now back in store. So if you want to get yourself your own Princeps mug, you can now get them directly from the Bling store. I have one. It was made very clear to me that this time it was the first version of it, and I wasn't number 3, so there was nothing that I could get precious about or upset about when I got a promo copy of it from Johnny. And they're also expanding their range of scenic bases for Legions Imperialis. So they have Horsham's Hope, named after the designer himself, John Horsham. And if you hadn't have kind of gathered, they have a quite aliens-y sort of vibe to them. If you imagine sort of Hadley's Hope from the Aliens films, Aliens film, very much that kind of vibe that you can now kind of bring to your Legions Imperialis bases. So very, very cool. Very cool. And one of my favourite 3D designers, Argonaut, Argo Jason on Instagram, I think his Instagram handle is, has released his spiky loyalist armor plates for Reavers. So you can now get them through Bling store as well. This is a full conversion kit for Reaver armor plates, basically to make them look completely different. I've got a few of his kits. They're really, really good. I still haven't finished painting up my what was it? The Krytos. I've got a spiky traitor version for Krytos, which looks really, really nice. So yeah, really, really, some really nice stuff coming out of Bling. If you do buy anything from Bling, remember to use our affiliate link, which is in the description, and anything that you buy, we get a very, very small kickback from Bling, but it all helps kind of support the channel. So especially if you're buying a Warbreaker, make sure that you click that link to go through our affiliate scheme, because that's a little bit more than a little amount that we get from one of those bad boys. But Wave 3 as well, over now, I think. Yet another successful run by Bling of their amazing Warbreaker Titans.
Absolutely insane Titans as well.
I think Dan Stevens has got 3 now. Yeah.
I
think he must have remortgaged his house.
I was going to say, yeah.
And everyone that he's done is converted.
Strong enough?
Oh, yeah. Man. He's converted all of them as well. I think it's 3 that he's got, but yeah.
One day we'll do a corrupted version, eh?
Yeah, I mean, I like mine. It would be better if it was like the first prototype or even the second prototype, but I guess I'll gather for the third.
Jesus.
Whatever.
God.
Okay, let's talk Troublemaker games.
Russia's rise with guns massive in size, engines of war roughly 8mm scale, plastic giant robots, they're on sale, a tabletop war game. modular scenery frames, city crushers from Troublemaker Games. City crushers, catchy slogan goes there.
Okay, so latest update from Troublemaker Games was that they you may have been made aware that there was a number of gaming stores across the UK that were hit by a massive issue around a server which went down that a lot of gaming stores kind of used, and this resulted in big problems for some companies. The whole server basically got bricked. Unfortunately, Vanguard Games, who is the principal supplier of Troublemaker Games, they were impacted. Other game companies like Two Fat Lardies, they were impacted as well. So the good piece of news and the great piece of news for Troublemaker Games is those are their Vanguard store is now back up and running again. So if you've been waiting to get your hands on any Troublemaker Games stuff through them, you can now go hit up their web store and it's now available again. I've recently been painting up some of their plinths that they released. I wonder if I can go grab one, actually.
Go fetch. Oh, here we go. Look at that backdrop, eh? You almost look like a streamer with that backdrop.
Almost.
Oh, look at those.
So this is my work in progress. I don't know how in focus that is. But this is just a portion of... So these are the ruins. Is that gonna? There you go. Yeah. This is the ruins set which Troublemaker Games does on one of their new plinths. Obviously, as you can see, I've not yet finished painting it up yet. All right, go on, get in focus. But they're well on the way. Hopefully, that will make its appearance at the Corsair Gambit. But I must say, what it actually makes to a especially a ruins set is amazing. I think these are going to turn into some of the best pieces of plastic terrain that I've got in my collection, because especially for LI, having the plinth around the building gives you a solid boundary, which in LI, if you're on that, you're in the terrain. It doesn't matter if you're behind it or whatever, but it also allows you to just model whatever you want. There's on this particular one here, you probably can't see. I've kind of got a footprint of a Reaver here, and there's another bit here, and I have a downed Reaver, which is basically going to be crashed up against that wall. When it's finished, I had some legs left over from a conversion I did with one of the War Dog kits a while ago. So just lets you kind of like add in a whole different level of scenic narrative to your terrain. And it's much nicer working with plastic than it is working with hardboard or something like that, where you've got to cut it all out, and God forbid, don't ever put it on card because it just warps the moment that you stick your PVA glue on it. But yeah, really enjoying that. I'll hopefully have some pictures of these kind of when they're finished up on the Instagram. And if you would like to get hold of any, then you can get them directly through the Vanguard store right now that it's back up. Okay, Grimdark Terrain.
Hell yeah.
Okay, so Bronco was in touch with me yesterday. He seems to be very, very excited about his latest release that he's dropping. So this is the first month of a 2-month drop. These are going to be named the Astartes range, if I pronounce that right. Astartes. Yeah. So this month he has released on his website the STLs in the monthly package for what he's termed the Tarantula's bigger brother. So if you can imagine like what a tarantula is in LI, but a bigger version of that, and spouting things like las cannons, heavy bolters, missile launchers. Bigger automated sentry platform, looks really, really cool. And on top of that as well, he's dropped a bunch of drop pod style alternatives. One of which is the Hyperios mainframe pod, which I think that is the first part of an expansion which will come next month. And then the medium tank drop cage. That sounds exactly what it is. It's basically a drop pod for tanks, like Land Raiders and that kind of stuff. And if you've ever wondered what a brick full of Space Marines thrown out the hangar of a ship in orbit looks like, then you have the Armored Spearhead drop coffin, which has also been released this month. So yeah, that is for basically it transports a load of troops. Looks like it looks like a drop coffin. It's very, very cool. And I've been trying to persuade him, and he's hinted. Let me see if he's given me a hard no on this before I announce to the world. Well, let's just say I asked him, will we ever see a Titan drop pod? Because I want one of those for my Tempestus. And he did say eventually, and people are chasing him on that one. So it could well be that we see a Titan drop pod as well in the future. So very cool.
Oh yeah, and
very exciting. And it's nice to see some kind of a little bit different stuff again coming out of Grimdark Terrain after a lot of terrain recently, Grimdark Terrain. But it's nice when he kind of drops these kind of more like these units, like the Samson drop pod and all that kind of stuff. It's really nice to have a few alternatives, and I think these will, especially the drop coffin. I can see a lot of people. In fact, I've been thinking how cool that would look on a landing pad, like a few of them lined up on a landing pad and stuff, as part of a scenic piece. So, not exactly sure how big it is. It looks quite big. It looks about the length of 4 25mm bases. So I assume it's probably going to be somewhere in the region of about 4 inches long, which would be quite big for the drop pod. And yes, and if you want anything printed for Grimdark Terrain, then you should head over to our sponsors, Rok Minis. So yeah, Rok Minis, you can get all of your Grimdark Terrain stuff printed from him. He is a printing service for Grimdark Terrain. He is one of their official manufacturers, but he also does a load of other cool stuff. So like when he was at Beachhead, we spied a very cool looking version. I'm not sure exactly what it was called, but it was basically Starship Troopers, wasn't it?
Troopers, yeah. Oh yeah. Oh man, I love Rok Minis.
Yeah,
they're absolutely great. I have a very proud owner of a 6mm Vampire Counts army, and the quality is astounding. It's really, really good.
Yeah, that was one of the things I was going to say next. He also does kind of, I don't know if that's War Master range, but it's like miniature fantasy range, doesn't he?
So at least when I ordered, you can choose both. I think there's options for either War Master, where everything's on kind of one base, or Warhammer Fantasy scaled down, where you have tiny little bases for each one.
That's
so
awesome.
Yeah, very, very
I
simple.
was most excited though about what he announced this week, which is have you seen the Space Crusading set?
Oh my god, yes, the Space Crusading set, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I didn't know if that would have the same kind of nostalgia pull for you as it would for me.
Oh no, I love Space Hulk. It's a classic.
Oh, it's not Space Hulk though.
It's not Space Hulk, no. But I love games in space with corridors and aliens.
Close enough, Johnny. Close enough.
And Marines.
Good guess. Yes.
I like the Alien franchise.
So as you may expect, it is basically kind of a version, or I assume I don't know if he's actually selling it with the rules, but it's like kind of miniature Space Crusade. So he's selling that for 85 quid, and it includes 65 resin minis and the bases. This includes 30 boarding troops, 14 grotlings, 8 orcs, 5 cursed, 3 xeno lurkers, 4 androids, and a dreadnought. And it includes 4 24 by 24 centimeter boards and walls. So these are like the board sections, which are, if you played Space Crusade, it basically is like an MDF version of the Space Crusade board. It has 4 dividing walls, 3 boarding vessels, and 27 doors, all done in like a really nice sort of 3D style, very, very similar and reminiscent to the old Space Crusade game. So yeah, super cool. I own an original set of Space Crusade up there, but the boards in particular have kind of, after 35 years, have started perishing. So it'll be nice to kind of maybe get a copy of this and play some old school Space Crusade on a bit more of a hardy. 24 inches, how big is that? That's probably that's like almost travel size, I guess, isn't it? Four of those, 48 actually 48 centimeters. So that's just like a foot and a half, isn't it? Foot and a half by foot and a half. So it's around that sort of amount. So yeah, if you like Space Crusade, if you like Grimdark Terrain, go hit up Rok Minis. Okay, so in the final section of today's show, we are going to delve into the Loyalist Legio's book, and in particular, we're going to look at the rules for Legio Osedax. Then what we are going to do is walk through, well, obviously the rules which are in here, but then we're also going to talk about maniple creations and put into practice essentially what we were talking about for the first hour and a quarter of this podcast.
Yeah.
Hopefully will kind of make sense. But yes, we'll waste no more time and we'll jump straight into it with the first Legio-specific trait, Reforged in War. Legio Osedax were nearly broken in the fires of treachery, and though it threatened to consume them, they refused to yield. So Legio Osedax Titans never suffer penalties to command checks and may ignore effects that force them to re-roll successful command checks. So this has kind of become a little bit more relevant in later years than it was originally when this book came out, with the sort of introduction of certain corruptions and people starting to use some stratagems a little bit more often, like what is the loyalist one? There is a should have become more prepared for that. There is there is a loyalist trait which basically imposes a -2 command check on the opponent, or a -3 if it is a loyalist princeps. There's too many of these.
Usually it's the traitors that do shit like that. So
yeah. Let's see if I can find it very quickly.
They haven't no, it's not Razor Tongue. That's the
No. We are well prepared today.
God, this is.
Go on. No, anyway, I can't remember. Tell me in the comments.
Yeah.
Although I'm sure I'll have worked it out by the time that I've done it. But these guys will never suffer any negatives to that.
No.
So originally when they came out, this was kind of like, it just felt like a bit of a throwaway one. But it is a bit more useful now than it was before. And it's all command checks, so that would be any sort of deficits to doing orders, or it would be any deficits to doing things like machine spirit rolls and that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So they never suffer penalties. Legio Osedax Titans never suffer penalties to command checks and may ignore the effects that force them to re-roll successful command checks. It's one of those nice perks, and honestly, the only time that I've ever noticed this was the one time I tried to use that ability was at a tournament. It was playing a guy called Ollie, who's a really good Osedax player, really nice guy as well. And he was just like, yeah, by the way, you can't do that. And I was like, oh yeah, I can't, can I? Right, okay, great. So like it doesn't happen very often, but there will always be like, if you're playing a friendly against somebody, chances are they'll know about this, and they just won't take anything, which means that you'll never use this ability. But in a tournament setting, people are more likely to take those sort of things, or those type of abilities. If they, most people they come across it's unlikely that they're going to play 5 games against Legio Osedax players. So, it's one of those things that when it happens, it's quite a nice kind of feel good benefit, but it's not really something which. It just happens. It just is. There's no real benefit to a certain maniple or a certain way of playing. It's just kind of a nice perk to have on top if you remember to use it. I think it's definitely one of those ones where it happens so infrequently you forget that you have it, but it might be that...
if you're playing Osedax,
I mean, you don't have that much to kind of think about. You've only got 4 traits.
Exactly.
So
yeah,
just think about it. So yeah, it's all right. It's the only trait that they have those, so it's not very defining as a characteristic. It's pretty vanilla, kind of quite middle of the road. It's okay, essentially. Their first Legio specific stratagem is Relentless March, and this is a 1-pointer. The Princeps of Legio Osedax strive to repay their loss in kind, throwing themselves into the battle without hesitation. This stratagem can be purchased by any Legio Osedax player. Play this stratagem during any strategy phase. For the remainder of the round, friendly Legio Osedax Titans may be issued full stride orders without the need to make a command check and are not affected by difficult terrain and dangerous terrain. So this is quite a good little stratagem, to be honest, because there are other stratagems which everybody can take, or loyalists certainly can take. I think it's the 2 stratagems are only forwards for loyalists and warlust for traitors. Yeah. They're both 2 points rather than 1 point. And although warlust affects, you get that bonus boost to boosted movement, and I think only forwards also helps with charge orders. If all you're wanting to do is just a full stride, this is half the points cost. It's only 1. You get that full stride automatically. You don't need to pass any leadership checks, and you're not affected by difficult and dangerous terrain. That latter part is probably less likely to come up very often, but it can certainly be a consideration if somebody plays Scatterable Mines on you or something, if that happens to come up, or if you're playing on a varied battlefield with rivers and ruins, stuff like that, which is dangerous terrain. At 1 point, it kind of feels to me like I would probably take that. I have it in my strat hand as one of the ones I select. And I think especially if you were playing this as like a combat Legio or close combat Legio, or even just something like a light maniple, which you wanted to push Titans up as quickly as possible. A turn 1 Relentless March, everything automatically passes that you want to move up. You issue those orders first, they're freebies, off they go. And then, and the good thing about Loyalists as well is that they have that once per game ability, Adaptive Tactics, which means that you can change your order after the damage control phase to any other order other than emergency repair. So you can, it's really useful.
Really good.
And I've used this a couple of times where I've full strided up the board. People moved on a full stride order up the board, and people have kind of expected you to go off and move or ignore you because you're not going to do any shooting this turn, and then you change that to a split fire order, and all of a sudden you're putting shots into a side armor or something like that. I've also used it to great effect with the reverse, putting something on like a charge order and then getting that charge ability off in the movement phase, and then flipping it to a full stride in the combat just before the combat phase to then go and grab an objective or something. So it's fine. It's not necessarily an auto include. It's also not necessarily something that you would want to probably use every single game, like I don't know, Offensive Surge for Furians or something like that. But at 1 point, I think it's well costed, and it gives a slightly cut down but automatic ability to Osedax you wouldn't get for any other Legio. You'd have to pay a bit more, and it's all right. Yeah, not bad. Yeah. Any thoughts on that one before I move on?
No, not really. Yeah, it's good. It's just very solid, well-rounded.
Yeah.
It's nothing insanely exciting, but as many loyalist things are, and as we discussed earlier, it's good.
I think that this is one of the defining points about Legio Osedax. They're not overly flashy. They seem to have some quite solid middle of the ground kind of abilities, which are generally usually useful. But it's nothing which kind of pushes them into a game breaking or feel bad sort of situation. But at the same time, there's enough application there that they, you would be tempted to take most of them. The next one, the Legio specific stratagem, Blood Begets Blood. This is a 3-pointer. So this is obviously a little bit more of a consideration to take. Their numbers vastly reduced during the opening salvos of the Horus Heresy. The Cockatrices answered each new loss with righteous vengeance. This stratagem can be purchased by any Legio Osedax player. Use this stratagem when a friendly Legio Osedax Titan suffers catastrophic damage. After resolving the effects of the catastrophic damage, each friendly Legio Osedax Titan may immediately make a single weapon attack. This attack must be made against the closest visible enemy. Increase the plasma reactor level of any Titan that makes an attack in this way by 2, in addition to any other advances associated with weapons fire. Like I say, it's an expensive stratagem to play. I don't think that this is a stratagem which will be used all the time. I think that it probably favours heavier maniples if you are going to take this. Something that can suck up the additional 2 reactor points on top of any weapons fire that it would be doing. So really your warlords, I see this working well in an extergimus, especially if you lose a warlord. You're then 33% down most of the time in the 1750. So you need to capitalize on killing other stuff to make back that disadvantage that you've just lost by, or just you gained that disadvantage by losing such a big portion of your list. So being able to kind of make that reactionary attack and shoot, it's similar to the ability that it feels a little bit like, the Tempestus ability, whereby when they die they can make an attack as they die on the pass of a command check. It's a little bit like that, but obviously it's other Titans. I think the thing is that the bigger the games are, the better this becomes. If you were playing at like a 3,000 point list, and you were playing with a lot of models, maybe a lot of Reavers, a lot of Warlords, a lot of Warbringers, then this probably starts, increasing in value, because it's every friendly Legio Osedax Titan for 3 points can make an attack. It's not within the maniple, it's just, blanket everything. So if you're in a big game with lots of Titans and all of them can take you can take that reactor heat, you are going to be getting a lot of free extra shots. But if you've only got, say for instance, 3 warlords in an extergimus, you're only going to get 2 extra shots. So although that they can take the heat, you're not getting a lot in return to your heat and 3 strategy points.
I don't know.
Certainly in a 3,000 point.
I think any out of sequence attack, additional attack, is extremely valuable.
I'm not saying it's bad. I agree.
I think even in shorter, smaller games, the 2 warlords shooting is still, even if they're high on heat, I'd take that chance, because that's powerful. Especially
because it's after the catastrophic damage, so you could find yourself in a situation where the Titan has exploded, it's caused some significant damage to a Titan,
maybe,
and then you're able to kind of shoot at it, just before your next actual activation. And this could be just before your own activation. So if an opponent kills one of your Titans in theirs, that Titan explodes, falls over, does whatever they want to do. Then you get your 3, your free shot, and then assuming that you're not a reactor heavy loadout, you then can activate one of those Titans again and shoot again. So it's like getting an extra weapon for 2 heat, which is when you think about it, it's kind of similar to Offensive Surge, because I think that's 2 heat as well, and you get to fire 1 extra weapon again, and I think that's also 3 points, and that's also restricted only to a maniple. I think the difference here is that it's reactionary rather than you can choose when to apply that. Or maybe it's only 1 reactor point for, I think it's only 1 for Offensive Surge. 2 can be quite a lot. If it was only 1, you would be thinking about doing that on like your Warhounds, but you wouldn't be thinking that on 2. So kind of a little bit like an Offensive Surge ability, but I definitely think you get more for your money the bigger the games that you play, when you are going to be activating more Titans for free for 3 points, when that 3 points is a less impactful percentage of your stratagem hand points, if you know what I mean. At 1750, that's 3 of your 5 that you get to play. So it's a big so you've got to have a good reason to have held on to those 3 points and not used it on other stuff. But
I feel like you have this in your hand. You should have this in your hand if you're playing on stacks.
I think it's definitely it's a consideration. I don't know if it's an auto include. I do think that it depends on the maniple that you take, but I can understand why you would think that.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't. Like, if you convert it to kind of the actual effective output, like how much else in the stratagem pool has such a direct impact on the actual game itself.
I think it also depends on what weapons you're shooting. You know, if this allows you, if you're playing against knights, and that allows you to fire 2 free bellicoses,
hell yeah,
absolutely. You know,
but because of the stratagem hand, you can have it in your hand, and if you're not playing knights, you don't have to use it. Yeah. And there are enough,
as long as you haven't spent those points on static rain, or you haven't spent those points on the other things that you might think about spending. Sure. It's having it in your stratagem hand, I think, is one thing. It's whether or not you feel prepared to save those 3 points to use this, rather than say use a Vox Blackout or use a static rain against knights, or use a I can't think of multiple other things like smaller pointed stuff, like Relentless March and if you use Relentless March and then you place down a Concealment Barrage, that's all of a sudden that's 2. You want to do Tracer Cloud, then all of a sudden you can't afford it. So it's I don't think it's bad. I just think you get more. The bigger the games become, the much better that this starts kind of paying more dividends. And then their last trait is their specific war gear plasma channels. So the Forge World Phaeton was a significant power within the Segmentum Solar and was capable of equipping the Titan's Legio Osedax with numerous innovations. Any Legio Osedax Titan may be equipped with plasma channels for plus 20 points. Once per game during the movement phase, the Titan equipped with plasma channels can activate them. If they do so, decrease the reactor level of that Titan by D3 plus 1. And this counts as the Titan's activation for that phase. So 20 points for a piece of war gear is not bad. That's kind of in the sort of average amount. It's not overly expensive. It's definitely not cheap. The trade-off here is obviously you are losing a movement activation, but the benefit here is that you will be able to vent heat, but anywhere between 2 and 4 heat before a damage control phase. I think the biggest advantage here is that I've certainly done it. I imagine you've done it, where you've come to an orders phase and realised my Titan's pretty screwed. I need to do an emergency repair on this and either not move it or not attack with it in the combat phase. And more often than not, you choose to not move it and vent that heat with the emergency repair to allow you to not go into a red line or a yellow line in the emergency repair in the damage control phase. So
it
I think that this
is very well with the stratagem that we've just spoken about as well. Being able to recover that heat, favouring heavy, stationary, long-ranged shooty platforms that can get that free shot off anywhere on the board.
Especially if you are kind of then rolling round, if that's happening in the combat phase and it's rolling round to the next turn, you can try and bleed some of that heat, off and get some of that back before you get screwed, because you plays a Vox Blackout, all of a sudden you can't emergency repair. You fail a command check, all of a sudden you can't do an emergency repair, and that could be the difference between your fully shielded warlords shields completely collapsing, or 3 strength 9 hits to the body. So
you could double it up as well. Quite easily.
What do you mean? You mean having more than one?
So using the war gear and also doing emergency repair.
Oh yes, yeah. Absolutely.
So if you really want to juice it,
no, because you would be sacrificing both of your combat and your movement.
Yeah, true.
If you did that,
Yeah,
because it counts as your movement activation. So you would be going into, I'm on emergency repairs. Great. In the movement phase, I am choosing to activate the Titan, which means that I bleed that, but that means that you can't later activate it in the emergency repairs. I mean, it's still, if you're in such dire straits,
I guess
still an option. You know that in the movement phase, you know that when you do that emergency repair roll, you don't have to worry about bleeding any heat. You can just spend that on getting on your shields, assuming your dice roll's good enough, or fixing critical damage or anything like that, knowing in comfort that you have D3 plus 1 reactor points that you're going to automatically get back in the movement phase. But yeah, I do feel like this is what you wouldn't take this on a Reaver with a Gatling and a Melter, right? Because it's the only thing that's going to be using heat for, using reactor levels for, is pushing for movement or pushing for shields. So you are probably going to be fitting this on your gun platforms with weapons that require a push. So, I mean, for me, I'm thinking Warlords with things like Bellicosas, Conversion Beamer, Extirpators, especially if you've been on first fire orders, in a previous round, you might be getting quite hot if you fired those weapons twice in the previous round, and you want to fire them again this round. And at 20 points, it does kind of fall into that area where it's probably a bit too expensive to equip everybody. But you should probably lean into sort of I think like this build specifically would benefit from having that, and you're probably always going to use it as well. I can't think of a time where it wouldn't be a consideration, especially if you're a warlord, a backline warlord. Your only consideration would be, do I try and go on first fire orders and get one additional round of shooting or one additional weapon's worth of shooting this round, or do I instead bleed the heat to make sure that by the end of the damage control phase, I am as fresh as possible, ready to start this up again in the combat phase. So yeah, I think that's pretty good. I think that's probably one of the better war gears that they have. Again, nothing too flashy. It's just functional, it's utilitarian. When we were saying about leaning into a list build, I don't think any of these abilities kind of force you down a particular build. I think it seems like you will get some benefit from heavier Titans in a few of them, but all of these would work perfectly well on a light maniple, on a Ferox or a Venator. There's nothing which is hard pushing you down a particular playstyle, and most of them are quite applicable across any Titan chassis. You're just going to get possibly a little bit more benefit out of a Warlord platform than you would from say a Warhound. Ready for the personal traits?
Let's do it.
So first up, Natural General. Newly promoted to replace a fallen leader, the Princeps has a natural talent for battle despite their relative inexperience. During the strategy phase, when a Princeps is successfully issued with an order, a single friendly Legio Osedax Titan within the same maniple may be issued the same order without the need to make a command check. It's all right. Again, I think it's going to be situational. You're not necessarily going to want to do the same thing, kind of apply the same maniple across multiples. Again, it depends on your setup. If you're a combat Legio, passing a charge order on your Princeps, say it's a Reaver, passing that up then on a 2+, allowing you then to automatically pass that order on another Reaver within the same maniple. I think that is that's pretty nice. It kind of falls into that category of personal traits for me, where it's like one of those, if you've got two maniples, it's a nice to have extra.
Yeah. Like
it's not one of those things which is good all the time, but it would be nice to have when you need it. So a second Princeps ability in a demi maniple, I feel like this would be quite good in a demi Ferox or something. If you take like maybe like a like a just over minimum sized Ferox, where you have the 2 Warhounds and the mandatory Reaver with an extra Reaver. So you've got 2 combat platforms there. Or even just kind of, sometimes those hot dogs want to nuzzle up in close combat against some dudes. You never know. But yeah, I think it's all right. It's not bad. Careful Planner's the next one. The Princeps places their trust in carefully laid strategies, devising all manner of counterplays and potential threats. Once per game, the Legio Osedax player can reuse a stratagem that has cost 1 or fewer stratagem points that has been used earlier in the battle by the Legio Osedax player. The Princeps must be on the battlefield to use this ability. If the stratagem is one that can be used more than once, it may instead be used twice in that phase by the Legio Osedax player. So, yeah. I mean, that would allow you to reuse Relentless March if you want to do that full stride ability twice.
Mm-hmm.
It would allow you to place down a second Concealment Barrage sort of later on in the game. What other things are 1 point? A second Tracer Clouds to kind of, really kind of mess with somebody with those -2s. Sorry, that's not -2. That's the Blind Barrage, isn't it? Blind Barrage.
Yeah.
Or a second Tracer Cloud to get more rerolls against the target if they're playing a very static line. I think there's a lot of utility there. I really like that as a stratagem. You're obviously still spending the point for it. So again, if you were taking something like, a big ticket item like Blood Begets Blood or a Box Blackout, you are then going to have to think about those other stratagems that you're taking, because you're essentially going to be spending 2 on the same one if you intend on using this. But again, I think this comes down to how you want to build your list. I like the idea on this. If it was, again, a close combat maniple, you put down your Concealment Barrage, you walk your Titan into the Concealment Barrage so nobody can see it. Concealment Barrage goes off at the end of the round. Your guy's now out in the open. You put down another Concealment Barrage, another 9 inches in front of him. He moves into that this turn. And then, he's had two rounds of just walking through without being harassed, and then next turn he's in your gun line, he's in your back line, and you haven't had a single chance to shoot him yet, or things like that. However you want to kind of play
it did a similar sort of thing with my dual Tritonus and Vulpa list, the Greetings from the Warp narrative
with Stygian Veil.
Stygian Veil used twice to just shield the Vulpa Reavers. It felt too strong. Like it felt quite oppressive, but it was funny.
I think you were very unlucky to not win that game. That was the one against the guy from Advancing Fire, wasn't it?
I did it basically every game, but yeah.
Oh, every game.
Yeah, just hid them in the clouds because they just couldn't get shot. There was a sight item that just couldn't do anything, and it felt amazing.
Oh dear. Yeah. Okay, and then the last ability here is Lightning Assault. So the Princeps is known for practicing swift attacks, bearing down upon their foe with deadly intent. After both players have deployed, but before players determine who is the first player, Titans within the Princeps Senioritas maniple may immediately make a move. Each Titan may move no more than 6 inches when making its move. Any Titan that moves in this way cannot be issued orders during the first round. I really like that as an ability. I think that's possibly one of their better ones. It's almost like a slightly toned down War March. Is it War March, the Legio Mortis one, which is like a 3-point stratagem which allows them to move, but that's a full move before the game begins. And especially in this game where it's kind of more about objective taking, being 6 inches further up the board edge than your deployment zone before you even move, I think is really good. And although you can achieve the same thing through a full stride, which you can obviously then use your stratagem for, you're still getting your combat phase. So you can move 6, then the game starts, and then you can, I don't know, if you're, say that's a Warlord, it moves 6, it's a movement, so you can still boost, move 6 up, you then start your phase, move 6 up again, so that Warlord's now 12 inches onto the table. And if you're a 24-inch Warlord, Brawler Warlord, great. And you're 12 inches closer to the objective than you started on turn 1. becomes that much more harder to shift. So although again it's only a once per game ability, I think that having the ability to be, to tactfully maneuver in the first sort of round of the game can possibly really switch up the dynamics of how people have deployed. If you were to combine that as well with something like a long retreat, where you can move out of arc, you could almost kind of completely shift the focus of the board edge. So if you've set up everything heavy on one side and he counters you, and then all of a sudden you're 12 inches around the other side and you're coming up a flank instead of coming up squaring face on against these how your opponents come to counter you. I think that is quite a nice little stratagem. And with that ends the story of Legio Osedax and their abilities. Like I said, nothing too overly flashy. I think that they are, a good sort of mid-tier Legio. They've got some, dependable traits. I think that they work well as, for most maniples, I think they work well if they're loyalist or they're traitor. You can kind of get reasonable headway with any of them. And I think, if you wanted a Legio to kind of like just sort of learn with, it gives you a lot of not very complicated rules to sort of learn the game with, whilst still being intrinsically linked to the fundamental way of playing the game. So, your war gear is about venting heat. Well, that's a game mechanic, very much about venting heat. Your command checks, you're always just rolling what your command check is. You don't need to worry about any minuses from anybody else. It makes issuing that particular order a little bit easier if you want to do those full strides. A lot easier because it's free. So I think it's quite forgiving in that kind of maneuver, Titan management side of the game, which some Legios require a little bit more nuance to control, like Furians as the example again, right? Like you really need to kind of think about your heat management with those guys. So yeah, overall, I think that they're, a nice little Legio. I think solid mid-tier, loyalist Legio. But, he's can be kind of whatever you want them to be.
Yeah, absolutely. They seem fun. Getting maybe slightly more shooty vibes from them than...
Yeah, I think that because of the heat bleed ability, probably leaning more towards shooty, but there's nothing in there that is kind of incentivizing, overly incentivizing shooting.
No, not
so
at all.
You
and they have options to, they're not like hardly ruled into just shooting. They can kind of flex into other play styles without you being too penalized for it, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. So we've made a maniple. I've made a maniple. And you can feel free to weigh in on your opinions on this, Johnny. I looked at Legio Osedax. Like I say, we might be considering doing something with Legio Osedax in the future because they are one of the Legios that I own. I set myself 2,000 points, and with that 2,000 points, I created a list, basically trying to put it into practice all of the nonsense that we were sort of talking about in the first half of this show. So, 2,000 points. I knew that I would have quite a lot of points to play with for this particular points level. I could have done multiple things. I could have done a couple of demi maniples of this and had some quite, chunky demi maniples of probably like 4 or so, maybe got up to 6 to 8 activations if I'd have chosen to gone down that route. But for this one, I decided instead that I would focus predominantly on one maniple, one Princeps Senioris, and I would lean in a little bit on the kind of heavier side. And so for that reason, I chose a Fortis maniple. So the Fortis maniple has a couple of special rules. The main one is that if you are stationary, you don't move, your opponent doesn't get any bonus to their armor rolls against you if they're in your out of your front arc or on your due to your damage to your body. So you could be on like end of track, and somebody could be end of tracking on the rear, and they wouldn't be getting that +5 that they would normally get for that +3 from the damage and +2 in your rear arc if you haven't moved. They have also got an ability to share shields with members of the same maniple when they're in base-to-base contact, which you don't have to be stationary for, which makes it quite nice to basically advance models together side by side. You kind of get that ability to share shields should you want to weather a little bit more firepower, maybe not be, or rather sharing the heat from pushing maniples. But ultimately, it's designed to be a pretty hardy, resilient maniple. But because of the Titans which are in it, it is and can be kind of considered to be quite a slow maniple. Now, the Warlords in particular are going to be quite difficult to kind of push up the board, because Warlords by themselves are considered to be a bit cumbersome. And so, like, in this, certainly when it was the open engine war kind of phase of the game, it was all about objective taking. So slower legions kind of, or maniples kind of fell out of favor a little bit because they were too slow to claim them, really, or they could be mitigated with things like actually I did forget, I just thought I checked that you have to be in base-to-base contact with another Titan in the Fortis maniple to gain that ability to not take the armor damage. So you are incentivized to stay reasonably close to one another if you want to do that, and then you also get the benefit of the shield sharing as well. But yeah, your slower Titans were definitely at a disadvantage. Now, I have chosen, as part of this Fortis maniple, to choose the Princeps Senioris ability of Lightning Assault, which was the one that we discussed last, and the Princeps abilities. And this really is just to kind of mitigate that slowness, because you are getting that additional 6 inches movement at the start of the game, which means you can try and position yourself as much as you want to. Now, the way that I have built this is it is the full maniple, so it consists of the 2 mandatory Reavers and a 1 mandatory Warlord with one with the 1 optional Warlord and 1 optional Reaver. The Princeps Senioris I have taken as one of the Warlord Titans, and within that loadout he is having a macro Gatling Blaster, a Sun Fury Plasma Annihilator, paired Gatling Blasters up top, tracking gyros, and hardened carapace ×2. So this is what is referred to as a Brawler Warlord. A Brawl Lord. It is designed for reasonably close combat, not close combat, reasonably close range damage. It does best kind of in that sort of 10 to 24 inch range. But it can obviously still use all of its arm weapons all the way down to 0. And the bonuses that you get at close range with a macro Gatling Blaster means that it still can be quite useful if you find yourself kind of in actual close combat with an opponent. So you've got your stripper and your finisher in the forms of the paired Gatling Blasters up top and the macro Gatling Blasters. So your paired Gatling Blasters, their strength 5, they'd be your opening strippers, but in a pinch against targets away, or also against other Warlords or bigger, they can be finishers. Macro Gatling Blaster is just a great arm weapon, high strength, bonuses to hit, great finisher, can also be used for stripping. And then, as we spoke about earlier on, the Sun Fury Plasma Annihilator is also great as well. Tracking gyros allows you to make the most of those paired Gatling Blasters. gives you arc on those, replacing the corridor ability, which means that they have a full 45-degree arc of fire. It's important as you start pushing up the field that you keep things in arc, because it's much harder to keep things in arc when you are closing the distance than it is if you're kind of standing at the back of the board. And then the hardened carapace there, the ×2 to be taken on the 2 arm weapons. I had 10 points left over at the end of this build, and I needed to put something on. And because a usual tactic against people if they're attacking a warlord is if they can't hurt your body, they will try and shoot your guns off. It increases the armor of those arm weapons, which will essentially make them pretty much impervious to like random Vulcan mega bolters trying to just chance a 6 to destroy that weapon and cause you a bit of a headache. So, I mean, you could put something like a Bastion shield on somewhere, but I just thought that this seemed quite fitting for what the purposes of what this guy was going to do. And this guy was going to be the guy advancing with the Reavers, keeping up with them, and basically going and helping take some objectives in the center of the field. He was going to be backed up by a second Warlord Titan, this one taking a Bellicosa Volcano Cannon, a Conversion Beamer Extirpator, Apocalypse Missile Launchers, Jack and Gyros again, and the Osedax Plasma Channels. So, again, similar to what we were talking about earlier on, he is very much designed as a backline. If you've got an objective in your deployment zone, you would stick him on the objective. But your long-ranged fire support, he's going to be dealing some high damage. He can apply that damage to pretty much anywhere on the board with those weapons, as long as there's line of sight to them. But it is quite a reactor, chewy load up with the Extirpator at long range rolling to push for that, and the Bellicosa rolling to push for that. So that's why I've given it the Osedax Plasma Channels as well, to kind of help vent that heat. For that, you would be really kind of looking to first fire it most turns until it got too hot, and then when it got too hot, you pop the plasma channel, vent a bit of heat, and then continue firing later on. But this is the fire base that allows the rest of the force to move up together. Then the Reavers, regardless of the build, even if it is kind of a bit of a gun line that you're going for, I always like a Reaver with one chain fist in there. This one has Gatling Blaster, a Chain Fist, and Apocalypse Missile Launcher, so he can be used as a distraction Carnifex if you need him to be. Just run him up the field if you're up against another gun line, as an example. And he can also be used as a bit of deterrent if somebody's pushing up on you as well. So like a Warhound gets a bit too close, he will give that guy a bad time the whole day. But he's got the Apocalypse Missile Launcher on top that he can fire anywhere on the board if he doesn't have any other target. If he's on split fire as well, he can use that to shoot at anything on the board. And then the Gatling Blaster just to lend some more stripping ability to anything which happens to come within 24 inches of him, for maybe the Warlords to kind of capitalize and jump on. And then the final two Reavers here are more or less identical loadouts. They both have Gatling Blasters and Melter Cannons. The only thing differentiating the two of them is one has an Apocalypse Missile Launcher and one has a Vulcan Mega Bolter. So for this particular loadout, I would probably be advancing the Apocalypse Missile Launcher loadout up alongside the Princeps Warlord, staying in base-to-base contact with him to share shields, also to, when they are on an objective, say, to sit together and kind of take that, or really kind of lock down those negatives to their armor if they get shot at. And then the one with the Vulcan Mega Bolter is a little bit closer range because of the Vulcan Mega Bolter top hat. And he would be advancing more or less alongside the Distraction Carnifex Reaver. And yeah, just basically making sure that he almost like guard dogging him. So you're kind of leading him up the garden path. And then when he's ready to go run off and start shooting stuff, he would be let off his leash and away he kind of goes. So yeah, it's all about kind of like acting in pairs with these guys with the fire support from the warlord, and yeah, just going from there. So that's how I kind of approached building this particular list. From a stratagem point of view, I believe I considered I took the the Relentless March ability, the Osedax one. So I could, if I wanted to really push, I could, but obviously I wouldn't be able to do that in the first turn because of that ability. This would probably be like a late game objective grab or something that I would just keep that 1 pointer up my sleeve. And then for the most part, I'd be using things to kind of assist, just continue to sort of like help lay down the firepower. So that might be other things to help with stripping, like Titan Hunter infantry to for more stripping ability, or it might be an artillery barrage. I particularly like artillery barrage to kind of allow for helping against knights, or also just adding a little bit of strength 8 here and there if it's needed. And that's kind of how I came to this Fortress Maniple. It's unfortunately I don't have 2 warlords of my own. I would have quite liked to have kind of given this one a go. But because I've got a Corsair Maniple and an additional Warlord now that Oliver's painted me up a Warlord for them. But as a list, I really quite like the idea of them. And Fortis I haven't used a great deal. I think it just kind of lent itself quite nicely.
It's scary. That's
Opinions?
a lot to punch through. Yeah, there's a lot to punch through. It's quite a lot of models for what you're bringing as well. You've definitely cheaped out on the loadouts, which I think is a solid move. God.
Well, I didn't really feel like there was much compromise here, which was quite good. Like normally I'd have to look to. I mean, the thing is I could have probably. I could have taken some cheaper weapons, and I might have been able to fit in a Knight Banner or something there for an extra activation. But it didn't really feel like it wasn't calling to me when I was making the list.
No, this is definitely a good balance. It's scary. I don't want to face it. Please, no, don't get that second Warlord.
Right, Oliver, I'm going to have to get you to paint me up a second Warlord.
Jesus, yeah. Really, really solid list. There's not really much I can... I'm interested for the choice of Apocalypse Missile Launcher on the Chainfist Reaver. I'd expect that one to have the Mega Bolt,
the Vulcan,
and the Melter Cannon one to have the Apocalypse. Well,
it's the reason why I do it that way round. Yeah, your obvious thing is like it's close range, therefore you want the Vulcan on it. But the reason I choose and I come round, this is the way that I pretty much run all of my close combat ones now. Is all it takes is for people to move out the way of everything. 20 inches isn't as big as you kind of think it is. It's easy to be out of range at 20 inches. You can do a charge and kill something, but then find yourself massively out of position to do any damage to the rest of the mana pool. And you might just be Vox blackouted or quaked and therefore can't do anything. So the reason I like the Apocalypse Missile Launcher on the Chainfist is, yes, okay, it is one less dice and it's not rapid. But if you can use the Vulcan against a target, you can use the Apocalypse against a target. It's just slightly not as good at close range. But if you are relying on the Vulcan's ability to do that last point of damage when you've already got a Gatling Blaster, you've got a smash attack, and you've got a chain fist to one location, then it might make the difference. But I'm not convinced that it is desperate to take that, and I would rather be able to use that weapon every round. You know, stick it on split fire orders, or like I say, charge. What you can do is you can charge, and then say you're charging a Warhound and you spoon off the Warhound. You're in combat with it at the end of the movement phase. Adaptive tactics, switch to a split fire order. Use your other weapons, you know, your chain fist and your Gatling and smash attack to finish off the Warhound. Use the missile launchers up top to target something else completely different. and apply that damage elsewhere, because otherwise it's going to be wasted on the target which is smaller than you because it's inside a carapace.
It's a good fail-safe for sure.
Yeah, I just think it's personal taste here. I think both are good, and for 10 points, both are really good cost. Have a really good cost benefit. But the way I play, it's a personal preference. I generally go for an Apocalypse missile launcher there rather than a Vulcan.
Absolutely.
Any more final thoughts on that?
No, just all round, very, very solid list. Yeah,
thank you very much.
Good.
Let us know what you think in the comments, of course. How would you do things differently? What do you think to it? Have you used it? Are you a Legio Osedax player, and what do you run yourself? Do let us know. Do give us a like and subscribe. And if you are a patron, then you will also get your additional podcast New Sphere episode at the same time as dropping that. So do check out Patreon. But I think that is us done for today. Again, a little bit of a longer podcast than we've kind of done in the past, but I think it was hopefully it wasn't too rambly at the start, but hopefully you can kind of see the application of the thought process in the first half into the second half.
There's a lot to talk about when it comes to list building, so absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Okay, guys, well, if that is all, then it just leaves us with the one more thing to say, which is we'll see you again next time. Do please, join us on Discord, all that kind of good stuff. Say hello, come to our events, sign up on Patreon, buy my dice. We'll see you again next time. So, always remember to go big, go loud, and
go Maximal.